Welcome to Say the Word Reparations. The New Jersey Black Issues Convention has convened a panel of advocates to discuss the issue of reparations and pending legislation in the state of New Jersey about this topic. The purpose of this workshop is to learn more about reparations and why they are needed in today's society. To discuss this relevant topic, we have brought together Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter, Dr. Ron Daniels, and Ryan Haygood, Esquire. Before we get started with questions for the panelists, I've asked each of them to make some brief introductory remarks. We will start with Assemblywoman Sumter, followed by Dr. Daniels, and concluding with Ryan Haygood. Assemblywoman Sumter.
Thank you, and thank you to New Jersey BIC for keeping this issue alive. Say the word reparations in the state of New Jersey. I'm the proud sponsor of legislation A711, which is to create a reparations task force in the state of New Jersey. Lanisha, we've been hard at work since the beginning of the session during the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic. We've gathered safely to have this hard discussion. New Jersey was one of the last states to end slavery. As much as folks like to disagree and believe we're a progressive blue state, we were last in this realm. Additionally, there's education that is needed, that is in high pursuit, that our young people call for during the civil unrest of 2020 with the senseless killing of George Floyd. So for me, being able to say the word freely, reparations, in regards to the plight of African Americans in New Jersey, to tell a story, to take a deep dive into our history with some thought leaders across the state in an organized manner is critical to telling the truth and educating our folks here in our state. So I'm excited about this panel. I'm glad that NJBIC has chosen to continue to elevate spaces where we can safely have this discussion and ask the tough questions and explain the thought and the leadership and the history behind saying the word reparations.
Dr. Daniels.
Well, thank you very much. And let me first and foremost, I'm Dr. Ron Daniels. I'm president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and convener of the National African American Reparations Commission. Before I speak specifically about that, I'll be missing my responsibility if I did not give a shout out in a, well, we might say in libation format to some degree, to Donald Tucker, who was really one of the great visionaries in New Jersey behind the New Jersey Black Issues Convention, which is really a derivative of the National Black Political Convention convened in Gary in 1972, of which I was a major convener, if you will. And also to say that, great work with Donald Tucker. And of course, I continue to work with Bill Payne, Donald Payne, my dear friend, and of course, Bill Payne as well. And now doing work with the Honorable Raz J. Baraka as the Institute of the Black World 21st Century focuses on helping to mobilize support for Newark as a progressive city, if you will. The National African American Reparations Commission has several charges. Number one, it is to promote HR 40, which is the bill which is now currently before the Congress of the United States to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans. It is important to note that it's no longer a study bill. This bill is a bill now that is actually formulating reparations proposals. And we're on the brink of, if not passage in the House, potentially a executive order by President Biden. In the previous iteration introduced by Congressman John Conyers, we never ever had more than 50 sponsors. We now have 193 and 7 people who are committed to vote if it comes to the floor. And thanks to Senator Cory Booker, it was introduced in the Senate. And we have about 25 co-sponsors on the Senate side. This is unprecedented. So when you say the word reparations, this is no longer a fringe issue. Everybody is saying reparations, right? Number two, our mission is to popularize a 10-point program. I won't talk in detail about that, but we have a 10-point program which people can see on the IBW website, ibw21.org, because a part of our mission is to be a guide, to provide a frame of reference for the reparations discussion here in the United States of America and beyond, for that matter. In that regard, and finally, I would say that to this conversation that is relevant, we are looking at certifying local reparations initiatives that are springing up every day. Every day, there's just today, Cambridge, Maryland. I just saw something a few minutes ago. It is the National African American Reparations Commission that certified Evanston as a model for local reparations initiatives. And the New Jersey audience should be aware of the fact that California has already passed a reparations proposal. Again, I live long enough, you get a lot of stuff done. Shirley Weber was a dear friend, congressional, they had formerly at San Diego State, now the Secretary of State. She led the charge, and it has been passed by a bipartisan agreement with the Governor Newsom signing the bill. So you have Evanston as a model, and you also have now California as a model. So New Jersey is in the game and needs to be in the game. New York is contemplating and moving forward. Maryland is moving forward at the state level. So we're in the middle of one of the most exciting, most dynamic racial reckonings in the history of these United States of America. And I'm just proud and honored to be a part of this conversation because of the role that New Jersey and the New Jersey Black Issues Convention is playing in this process, and our former or our soon to be first governor, our Assemblywoman, Sumter. Thank you.
Amen.
Mr. Haygood.
Good afternoon, Lanisha. Thank you for convening us, and thanks to NJ Big for having this conversation. To Dr. Daniels' point, at such a critical time. Dr. Daniels, it's so great to share this space with you, and of course, my dear friend, Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter as well, who is championing this legislation here in New Jersey. Lanisha asked me to say a few words about the legislation to answer the question, at least in part, why reparations, and to Assemblywoman's point, why reparations discussion in New Jersey. So what I wanted to do is just to share a few slides that begin to answer that question that will then lead us into to a discussion. And so I love the topic, of this discussion, say the word reparations. This was a campaign inspired by one of the Assemblywoman's colleagues, the Assembly Speaker Craig Coughlin, who, when we met with him to urge his support of the New Jersey Reparations Task Force, he said back to us, listen, Ryan, I would support a task force, but the word reparations, it unsettles people, Dr. Daniels. The word reparations, it causes some level of anxiety and fear among folks. Why don't we call it something else? And we said back to the Speaker, Craig Coughlin, listen, the fact that we're asking you for a task force is itself the concession. At the very, very least, we have to be clear about what the task force will do. And at a minimum, the task force has to say the word, and the word obviously is reparations. A few words around why a conversation around reparations in New Jersey. This is obviously an image of a young Black boy. He's standing on a foundation, and the foundation is cracked. And we think a lot about how those cracks are the cracks of structural racism, and particularly now, to the Assemblywoman's point, those cracks are causing real earthquakes in Black communities here in New Jersey. Here's just a quick visualization of what the cracks look like in New Jersey. So this is a staircase of our racial disparities. I think it's true that a staircase is an apt analogy or apt metaphor for all of us, that we each face and confront and work to overcome challenges here represented by stairs. But for Black people in New Jersey, the staircase is especially steep. And I want to focus you really quickly on the second stair, which is New Jersey's racial wealth gap. So you'll see in the second stair that's $106,210 versus $179. It's a jarring racial disparity. That is to say that in New Jersey, the individual net wealth of white adults is more than $106,000. But for Black individuals, Black adults in New Jersey, the median net wealth is just 179 United States dollars. As I say in this tweet here, that's less than the cost of a laptop. And the reason that we have that racial wealth gap is because it was designed that way. As I say in the last sentence here, this tweet, it was designed that way during slavery. Really, really quickly, from our founding as a colony, New Jersey created this racially exclusive system for distributing property. We designed the racial wealth gap in slavery in New Jersey, and that has led to the stark racial wealth gap we see today in 2021. New Jersey was a colony that provided each English white settling family with 150 acres of land. And New Jersey provided an additional 150 acres of land for each enslaved Black person who worked on that land. By the 1800s, to the Assemblywoman's point, though this is not well known in New Jersey, more than 2/3 of all enslaved people, Black people in the North, were held captive in New Jersey. And then after becoming the last Northern state to finally end slavery, we developed our own form of sharecropping, which here we called cottaging. And there's a direct line from slavery in New Jersey and its founding as a colony to today's racial wealth gap. And here's why all that matters, because it is absolutely true that the past is never dead. As William Faulkner said, it's not even past. And the present we live with now, and that staircase and that racial disparity number is informed by our past. And we have to grapple with that. So this is the way forward. Really, really blessed and fortunate to have the leadership of Shavonda Sumter on the Assembly side and a number of other courageous Black elected officials who, in this photo, introduced legislation that would have at that point made New Jersey the very first state in the country to create a reparations task force at the state level. California actually borrowed our legislation, introduced it, and passed it. So they became the first. But the purpose of this conversation today is to move New Jersey in a way that we become the second. Really quickly, on Juneteenth, June 19th, we as a state celebrated that holiday for the first time as a state holiday. It was on that day that we sought to do more than symbolism. We sought to marshal the support energy around the first celebration of Juneteenth to move the New Jersey Reparations Task Force bill forward. We were joined by more than 500 people who marched with us from the Lincoln Memorial here in Newark to the steps of City Hall to urge for the creation of the New Jersey Reparations Task Force. The bill, as Assemblywoman Sumter mentioned, is S322 A711. We then on that day, and we have since built a broad-based coalition, a multiracial coalition of supporters across New Jersey to urge the state to create this task force. This is a critical year. This is an election year in New Jersey in which every seat is up, 120 seats in the Assembly and the Senate, and the governor's running for re-election. The march led us to the steps of City Hall. We had powerful speakers who urged us to say the word reparations, including our very own Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter, who was followed by our congressional delegation, including Bonnie Watson Coleman in Congress, Congressman Donald Payne, and finally the Lieutenant Governor, who on that day, the first Black woman Lieutenant Governor on that day said, this conversation has to be about reparations, that if we want to make this moment different, to Dr. Daniels' point, we gotta be willing to say the word, and the word is reparations. So I just want to encourage you all as a close to take action now, to actually make this moment different by going to 400yearsnj.org to reach out to your elected officials in the state legislature through this website, to reach out to the governor, to urge them to support the passage of the New Jersey Reparations Task Force bill this year. We have every indication that the governor will sign the bill when it gets to his desk. We just have to get it to his desk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for your introductory remarks. And before I move forward with some of those questions that I have based on Mr. Hagood's slides, I think the first thing we need to do is, there may be people who are new to this conversation. And so I really want to go back and have an initial conversation with everyone about what is reparations. You know, some people may not know what we're talking about. So can each one of you briefly describe what you consider to be reparations?
Lanisha, and if you don't mind, gentlemen, I'm going to take a first bite at this apple. And Dr. Daniels, you will appreciate the comments that I'm about to share. While the world has evolved, and we should be comfortable with the word reparations, we've done it as a country for other cultures. And I'm sure you will share those remarks. Additionally, in your opening statement, Dr. Daniels, you shared how other municipalities and states are moving towards reparations. So this is not a new concept. And even as we look at resettlements now, still part of this process. One of the things that I struggle with is what is the cost? As legislators in the state of New Jersey, we do not have an infinite amount of money nor a blank check to satisfy, if you will, or repair the harms that were done and the opportunities that were missed, stolen, or we were not allowed to access just because of the color of our skin or our race. The other piece, when Ryan mentioned our Juneteenth, first time celebrating it as a state holiday, then the federal government followed New Jersey. So we know we're leaders in New Jersey. We know we're leaders for the national platform. I believe it was Paulette Brown who said, there is no time expiration on reparations. There's no time expiration. We hear from folks, and I hear from legislative colleagues, because in the legislature, in order for a bill to become law, just some things that are very fundamental, I need 41 votes in the assembly and I need 21 votes in the Senate. And to be sure, I always like to have at least 45 votes in the assembly and at least 22. But if I can't get 22 in the Senate, I'll take the 21, because as they say, a win is a win, right? To get it to the governor's desk. But what we're struggling with is the cost and believing that it wasn't my generation that caused the harm. And the realities are, it's a stolen legacy, a stolen opportunity at wealth, a stolen freedom, due to no other fact of being treated as less than a human. So for me, it's that conversation daily with folks who are my colleagues, who are trying to understand why they have to engage in a conversation about reparations that happened in the 1800th time period. So it's important that we take these times to educate now and understand that we can correct some of the pain and right a lot of the wrong of the past, but yet we're still living it today. Because if you see the wealth gap that was prominent on the stairs for the Institute of Social Justice that they have chronicled for us is today. It is not from the 1800th century. And we also know that a big part of wealth is home ownership, and New Jersey has its history. So for me, reparations is all encompassing. Yes, we're doing the work daily to deal with the systemic structures and cracks that are in the system, to correct a number of the harms that were done in the past, but we are by no ways completely there. And a reparations task force, to me, will help work towards a comprehensive solution and not a piecemeal solution. So thank you for that question, Lanisha.
Well, let me dive in here, because I think one of the reasons why we have a National African American Reparations Commission is so we can be helpful in this regard. There is no such thing as an evolving definition of reparations. There is a definition of reparations which is well established in international law. In basic popular terms, reparations is simply the repair. It is repair of the physical, psychological, intellectual, spiritual, or cultural damages or harm inflicted upon a people by a nation or another people. That's the broad definition. And the reparatory justice process involves several steps. Number one, the acknowledgement that such a harm was inflicted. And obviously there's some other steps, but obviously compensation. The apology in and of itself is not sufficient. Reparations is well established in international law and has been done. So therefore, the most popularly understood case of reparations is the awarding of reparations to Jews who were in one of the most heinous crimes in all of human history, systematically and mechanically destroyed in the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. And so they were awarded benefits in various ways in order to compensate for that. As it relates to African Americans, we are dealing with the greatest Holocaust in human history. The numbers are staggering. Even the smallest numbers are staggering. If you're talking 15 million people, some people say as high as 100 million people who were torn from the African continent and brought here against our will. So reparations is for that original sin, one of the original sins of this nation. But it's important to point out that that is not the only thing that reparations is for. It is for all of the derivative, racially exclusionary policies that came out of this original sin. For example, Ryan cited one of them, the Homestead Act. In the Homestead Act, white folks in this country who claim they have no, and I understand this is why the education is important. That's why the commission is important. There's something called an intergenerational benefit and an intergenerational deficit. You may not have been directly involved, but you benefited from the actual the existence of land that was given to white folks moving to the West who got land. We did not get that, Homestead Act. And then we're also looking at things like the GI Bill. We fought in this country. America's most patient patriots fought in the war, had to fight under the French flag. We're still trying. We did not get the GI Bill. The suburbs built through the Federal Housing Administration Act. We didn't get it. And it comes down to such thing as the Negro removal program of the 20th century. In my era, it was called urban renewal. Black communities were targeted for disinvestment. Today it's translated into redlining and gentrification. All of these things qualify. So while it is about the great crime of enslavement, it is also about the contemporary kinds of racially exclusionary policies that we are suffering today. Final thing I would say this, is it's important to define it in that way because we must also distinguish reparations from ordinary public policy. I mean, there are things we got to deal with right now because unfortunately America just don't do people right. Poor people, white people, a whole lot of people don't get done right. But reparations, and by the way, one of the best things that has happened that I encourage, beautiful, is equity. Now, all of a sudden, and that's good, the movement is pushing equity lens. But the equity lens is about what? That which will happen now, henceforth, and forevermore. It does not deal with the accumulated damages of the past. And so I know there's going to be some jobs programs, this, so forth and so on, but we have to, that's all great. But as we define this, we want people to understand what reparations is all about. And finally, let me just say, with Evanston, they didn't just study it. Evanston is awarding reparations. It is the only city municipality that is actually awarding reparations. And Robin Ruth Simmons, the ultimate brilliant, because there's so many women leading this movement, by the way, ultimate Robin Ruth Simmons is a bad sister. And I'm honored to say that she is now a member of the National African American Reparations Commission, and she is at your disposal to come and teach and to be part of this overall process. Forgive me for being a little bit long, but that question is a crucial question.
I mean, first of all, I love this conversation. You can't get better than Governor Sumter and Dr. Daniels on this conversation, but I want to underscore right that the root word of reparations is repair. And the reason why it was so important for set forth that staircase is because it lays out by the numbers what the Black experience is like in New Jersey. And there are really only two takeaways, right? Either you say, well, the reason that Black folks confront those racial disparities is because they created those numbers or those numbers were created. So very often what people will say is, well, the reason the racial wealth gap is so staggering is because there's something wrong with Black people. We don't work hard enough. When we do work, we're prodigal with our finances. We don't save well, right? There's something, the reason our individual net wealth is less than $200 is because there's something wrong with us, tragically wrong. Our DNA is messed, there's just something wrong with us. But The other piece of the narrative, which is reflected in the historical narrative, is that that number was designed that way. And although we didn't create those cracks in our foundation, we inherited those. It's incumbent upon us to take responsibility for them. And a key way to do that is to begin by having the conversation finally. Folks have talked about the country, our communities, our states being in the middle of a racial reckoning. And there's all this discussion about how do we make this moment different? And I don't think, to Dr. Daniels' point, to the Assemblywoman's point, this moment can really be different if we're not willing to do things in this moment that we have not previously been willing to do. One thing we haven't been willing to do is to say the word reparations. There's all manner of questions attendant to the word reparations, right? What does it mean? Who gets it? Where does it go? Who pays for it? What are the policies we put in place to fill in those gaps, right? Because there's one piece of it is certainly a financial investment, but to Dr. Daniels' point, another piece of it is, but what kind of policies do we need to design a new system that actually connects Black people to wealth? How is it, for example, that I am sitting in the city of Newark where I live, that only 20% of the people who live in Newark own their homes? And if home ownership is the primary driver of wealth, and it is, how do you connect people in Newark to wealth when 80% of the city rent? How's that a system that connects Black people to wealth? It isn't. So how do we create policies, practices, behaviors to finally connect us to the things that have separated us from wealth? And that's all part of what this conversation and an officially created New Jersey Reparations Task Force will do. Last thing I just want to say really quickly on this is, as a practical matter, and the Assemblywoman can speak to this more powerfully, in an election year, elected officials are often most attentive to what their constituents are advocating for. And this campaign, as I shared at the top, is inspired by conversations we've had, including with Speaker Craig Coughlin, who was reluctant to say the word reparations. So we thank him because he inspired a campaign called that Say the Word Reparations. The more that we say it, the more we encourage our elected officials in New Jersey to say it, the more likely we are to get this bill passed this year. And this is a critical year to do so.
And if I may, Lanisha, before you move to the next question, and this may come out shortly, and Dr. Daniels, I could not do this work without my brothers in this process. We women are strong, and especially we Black women, we're doing what needs to be done. But it truly is an honor to have the thought leaders supporting the effort. But as we talk about what it means to have a campaign, for me, I'm 10 years in office now. We're coming off of a census. We're coming off of a historic pandemic with COVID-19. We're coming off of civil unrest. So really, if we're going to build out a future in New Jersey for children of color, which will be my grandchildren at some point, God willing, but I have two beautiful children, or young adults now, 21 and 23. It's important that we create these opportunities, that we have this task force, and we hold elected officials accountable on the state level to have courage, right? What is it to serve an elected office if you're not going to make those tough decisions? The other piece is, if we do not pass this reparations bill, if we do not pass it by the second Tuesday in January, the clock starts over again. So the pressure points are there. The work has been done. Ryan mentioned it's compromised enough by having thought leaders create the task force. We didn't come up with a dollar figure yet. We didn't come up with all the repairs and restoration efforts that are needed. And we are by no means saying this is the one bill that will resolve all of those issues, but it is a start to get our thought leaders around the table centralized so that we can begin to put together a statewide work product. And that's why I'm doubled down in this space to be sure that we push on those buttons, because as the viewers see elected officials and they're coming around and we're asking for your support, I'm one of them. I'm asking for the support to send me back to Trenton. Let's get that hard commitment that if this bill is put before them, they could do two things: sign on as a co-sponsor and vote yes. And if they have any questions, they can see any one of us for those answers. So thank you for that little soundbite, Lanisha.
So let's continue that conversation. How do we get New Jersey to be the second state in the country to pass this bill? So, you know, Ryan, Dr. Daniels, please add on to what the Assemblywoman said. How do we get there?
Well, and that's one I can't be as helpful as I would like to, because I live in New York and whatever. But certainly what I've said is that we at the National African American Reparations Commission are supportive. We try to monitor what is happening all over the country, and people are aware of what's happening in New Jersey. And to the degree that we can come, and if there are hearings to provide testimony or anything along those lines, we're willing to do it. And I would not be surprised if not the Honorable Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee might not also be willing to weigh in. And let me just say that to both Ryan's point and to Assemblyman Sumter's point, what I respect about her so much, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has said that there are lots of good policies. She said, but only reparations is the umbrella policy that gets at those cracks that Ryan was talking about. It goes at the strikes at the heart of structural institutional racism. And there's reason for some people to be a little shaky, a little afraid, because at the end of the day, it will force this country, it's the state and the country, to reckon with itself in terms of what kind of systems do you put in place. And at the end of the day, by the way, not only will that benefit Black people, that will benefit all of humankind, which is by the way, who we are. That is who we are as a people. So we stand ready to help in whatever way we can, but obviously the real work has to be done in the state of New Jersey. I will be speaking to the Congresswoman tomorrow, because we have HR 40 sessions every Thursday, and I'm going to mention to her what's happening in New Jersey. And you know, she may be willing to come and be a part of a virtual forum or come and do a press conference or something in support, because she is on a mission to make sure that reparations, that people say the word reparations and back it up and put some flesh behind it.
Amen. I mean, I think the path, Lanisha, to your question is, it's an opportune moment for us to move along that path. We are, as was mentioned, in the critical election year. The whole goal of government, right, is for elected officials to meet the needs of their constituents. The needs are clear, but there's also a fantastic opportunity for New Jersey. There's a national conversation happening right now around how to respond to structural racism. And in some areas, New Jersey's led. We've been really, really proud to stand with the Assemblywoman to do a number of things to expand democracy, right? So New Jersey led the country in terms of restoring the right to vote to 83,000 people on probation and parole, work that Shavonda Sumter on the Assembly side championed. And then we made sure that people could actually register to vote at the beginning of the pandemic by passing online voter registration. Very recently, New Jersey, again, thanks to the Assemblywoman, championed early voting so that Black voters in New Jersey in this election have 2 Sundays before November to participate in Souls to the Polls, that we can go to our places of worship and then go perform our civic act of our civic responsibilities by voting. The reparations conversation is in line with that same push to lead the country, right? I so wanted for New Jersey to be the first, but happy for us to be the second, to answer the question, so how do you respond to structural racism? What do you do when you're dealing with the vestiges of an institution that happened centuries ago, but shows up in every aspect of how Black people live in New Jersey, in health, in wealth, in criminal justice, in democracy? Like, how do we respond to that? Here's one way to respond. To the Assemblywoman's point, we create an officially created forum with some of the best thought leaders here in New Jersey and beyond to have finally a conversation about New Jersey's role in slavery, finally. So there's no mistaking about how it happened. And relatedly, how do we create policies make recommendations around investments and other things to respond to the enduring harm. That's really what the conversation is about. It's an action-oriented conversation. And we should say to our elected officials, listen, our vote for you hinges upon your support of the New Jersey Reparations Task Force bill. If you do not support it, we will not vote for you. And I will say it's a bill that has vast support from Black elected officials in New Jersey. What it needs is broader support. So there's a real question right now around non-Black allyship. So how can non-Black people stand with Black folks? This is a core way to do this. If you were Black, definitely support it. If you're non-Black, definitely support it. We need broad-based allyship, which looks like standing up and on behalf of Black folks to get this Reparations Task Force bill passed. You can go to 400yearsnj.org, interact directly with your elected officials and the governor.
So I would love to build on the work that we've done, and I want to double down in this space. And it takes a commitment, which is something I don't have a lot of, but it takes a commitment of time to be in this space. To your point, Dr. Daniels, I want to take you up on at least trying to get in touch with Representative Sheila Jackson and connect us with her. Additionally, Ryan, I want to move back to us having weekly conversations because when you talk about non-Black support, Representative Malinowski from New Jersey, when I was in Somerset County on Juneteenth Day, lifting up reparations, it was I'm a sponsor of the bill in Washington. It was like this. We needed to be like this, right? Unequivocally like this versus like this. And we need to create that pressure where they're comfortable saying it and they know the reasons why. So I'd like to work on creating that space and allowing, because elected officials like to do what during campaigns? Say they're talking to constituencies and groups of people. So I think if we can put some pressure on during these next 6 weeks of the campaign, if you will, we'll do a Zoom virtual. We can work with NJ Big, since I'm on that platform now, to elevate these conversations and build that bipartisan support. And of course, Dr. Daniels, love to have you there as well, because them understanding the intersectionality and intergenerational impacts of reparation in our community, there's no better testimony than hearing from you.
So Assemblywoman, you spoke about the future, our future generations. And, I'm thinking now that I'm a parent, I have to start thinking about that. And so, I think it's important that we begin to have these conversations with our children. They are very far removed. I mean, I have a 2-year-old. He has no idea, what slavery is, what it was, and what it has done to his future. So how do we begin to have these conversations about reparations in our classrooms? And Dr. Daniels, can you start that conversation for me?
Well, I think one of the things we need to do, and let me just say that I'm thinking over the next few weeks, while my little radio show on WBAI does not allow us to specifically advocate for legislation, we can educate around reparations. And one of the values of what you're talking about, and I've been working on reparations forever, and just this conversation today has been stunning to me. I never knew that New Jersey had what you described, Ryan. I never knew that. And I happen to believe that if more people knew better, they would do better. Now, there's some hardcore white folks who ain't never gonna change, but we just need, I'm just being cold in reality. But there is a margin of people, because they've never ever been taught real history. They really do not know what happened. And if there's some who, if they knew better, they would do better. I also think that it's important, I know there's some relationship probably with the People's Organizations for Progress and whatever. There's a need to put some heat on at the grassroots level. Many of these assembly people, I'm using Congressman Walter Fauntleroy's arithmetic of power analogy. Many of these folks are coming from districts that have 25, 30% Black population. They need to hear from their constituents in those districts, and a plan to get that done would also be very, very helpful. And the other thing is, I don't know what the status of it is, but I do know that Bill Payne for many, many years, fought for the Amistad program. The Amistad program would be, at least in terms of public education, would be an incredible piece. I guess it was passed, but maybe not implemented. I'm not entirely sure what happened, but that Amistad model is incredibly important in terms of getting the kind of education out that we need. But at the end of the day, I think a key point that has been pushed here, which I think is like you said, is the minimum, is just studying the issue ought to be something that everybody should be able to agree to, and just learning from it. So I'm hoping that our white allies, our Latino allies, and others will come on board, because, I mean, come on, aren't we willing to just study and say the word? At least we ought to be able to do that.
Mr. Haygood.
I mean, I would just pick up on Dr. Daniels' point. If you think about, in some ways, the acceleration over the last 18 months and what the country has sort of gone through, that we've been, even now we're separated, right, physically because of COVID-19. We're in the throes of, an emergence, we hope, from COVID-19. We're in the throes of multiple pandemics. And I think that's ignited a conversation that the country has long been needing to have around, what do you do with race, and what do you do with the effects of slavery? And it's pulled millions of people to the streets following the death of George Floyd, and it's caused us to have conversations we haven't been willing to have. I've seen things I didn't think we'd ever see, right? I mean, you can't diminish the ways in which we've seen some of the symbolism, the removal of the Confederate flag from the Mississippi state flag. My wife's father is a Mississippian his whole life, and he told me a couple of years ago that he could never imagine the Confederate flag coming out of Mississippi's flag. It's out. We've seen the toppling of some of those statues, right? Black Lives Matter painted on streets. I mean, we have seen conversations around race move really quick, really expeditiously in ways we never thought would happen in a short period of time. And this Say the Word Reparations campaign is a part of that, to continue to push the envelope. Because if we're unwilling to say the word, right, then we can't imagine what the repair would actually look like. And that's why this task force is so important. Even on the evidence, to Dr. Daniels' point, even on the Evanston example, we don't know what the number is, right? I don't know that there's a number that's going to repair those cracks, right? You would need to accompany the investment with a foundation that is firm. And the foundation has to be made anew with new practices and policies into which you make investments. So the conversation around what the number is, without talking about ways to repair the foundation, is an incomplete conversation, which is why the genius of the Assemblywoman's legislation is around having a fulsome conversation in every direction. And New Jersey's poised to do that. And with enough encouragement from constituents, that bill will move this year. Of every confidence that we'll be celebrating its passage when we get into January. We have a fair amount of work to do before we get there.
Absolutely. And couple of points for former Assemblyman Bill Payne fought hard for Amistad Commission and curriculum to be instituted in New Jersey public schools. There are inconsistencies with the implementation and the rollout of that curriculum. One of the things that we did structurally as a legislature was we passed legislation this year to appropriate $10 million for scholarships for teachers who are teaching the curriculum, and it's a contest for them. So that way there's some incentive. I wish it didn't have to be. I wish it just happened automatically for the sake of telling the truth, right? And giving our students a young connection with the Amistad and the story and the journey and the perseverance. But we had to put some incentive behind it. And that's a great thing. So what we're looking at doing now is seeing how we can make sure it's in every school district. There's over 500 school districts in the state of New Jersey. Each of them can select their curriculums. I never knew that. I thought it was when I went to school, and I know I'm dating myself. Hearing Dr. Daniels, don't say a word, right? Don't start. But I believe we have the same curriculum, same base curriculum. That is not the case. So we really have to push on so many levels when we think we fixed it to make sure that it's being taught in those small suburbs that may not have the diversity of a Patterson, of a Newark, of a Jersey City, of a Camden, making sure the story is told, because that's the first pass people look for. I had no idea, so it's not my fault, right? Why am I responsible? Because I had no knowledge. Matter of fact, I didn't even live in New Jersey during that time. I'm first generation here in New Jersey. So really making this a full discussion, I believe the Reparations Task Force goes nicely, it fits nicely into all the body of work. And Ryan, you threw off some pieces that I still cannot believe, and I'm thankful to God that we were able to push through restoring the right to vote to persons on probation and parole, making sure that persons are counted, not from their prison house, but from where their last known residency is, expanding early voting, vote by mail opportunities, curing that ballot so that a voter's always counted and not disenfranchised. Like, we've gone through some pains. Now combating the wealth gap. All of these things are just pieces, but Dr. Daniels, if we can put it under one umbrella and we can start looking at even our school houses, creating a true, thorough, and efficient education, which Big has touched on every last one of these issues through the multitude of workshops that they continuously do. But this would, again, put it under one umbrella, and we really can take a deep dive on policy and finances and direct our resources with precision for the greatest impact.
Well, unfortunately, our time is coming to a close. This has been an excellent conversation, but before we do close, I'm going to ask each one of you to provide us with some final remarks. Dr. Daniels, can you start, please?
Well, I just want to say what a privilege it was to be a part of this conversation and to learn from it. You know, I'm a now retired distinguished lecturer from York College, Center University of New York, but I always have said, to me, teaching is also learning. I've never taught a class that I did not also learn something from the students. And in this instance, it's not students, but sitting here and listening and learning has been very motivating. So that's what keeps me moving. And I just want to say you have my support. We'll be moving forward with the National African American Reparations Commission to help in whatever way we can to make sure that the fact that New Jersey is the second does not mean it won't be the best.
Assemblywoman?
Thank you. And I love those remarks, Dr. Daniels, and I look forward to partnering with you on this. I encourage folks to go to the website, which Ryan will repeat again, to support us in this effort. If you'd like to hear more from us, we'll put those spaces in place so that folks can learn more. Let's not be afraid to learn. I think that's a definite need. I've been growing on this journey. Additionally, let's hold our elected officials accountable. You got to agitate us so that we can take action. Let's not just give a pass. Our young people do not accept it from us. They do not accept the pass. So I need us to be adjutants in this cause to make sure that we move this bill this legislative session before we go into a new session. Say the word reparations. Thank you.
Mr. Haygood.
And I would just echo what Dr. Daniels and the Assemblywoman have said, that this is a moment that requires action. You know, this is a verb. We've received an invitation from our Assemblywoman to make sure that we hold our elected officials accountable in an election year. So I encourage everyone watching this to please go to 400yearsnj.org. 400yearsnj.org. It'll help you identify your elected official in the state legislature, and then reach out to them. I encourage you to call them, to set up meetings with them, to get them live. They want your vote. You can organize a community group of folks in your area to schedule a meeting with your elected officials to make sure that they commit, one, to co-sponsoring the bill, and two, to supporting it in the right after the election, right? So I think we extract a commitment, we hold them accountable, and then we celebrate when Governor Murphy signs the legislation later this year. 400 years, NJ.org. And thanks again, Lanisha, for leading us through this conversation.
I'd like to thank each one of you for joining our conversation today on saying the word reparations. It's important that we say this word so that we understand that we cannot fix the mistakes of the past, but we can help remedy the things for our future and for our future generations. Thank you to Assemblywoman Sumter, Mr. Haygood, and Dr. Daniels for joining our conversation today. God bless.